Hey there, I'm Mr. Terry. I'm a high school history teacher. Welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video. All right, Simple History recently loaded up a new video, and I thought the topic sounded really interesting to talk about, and it's called Dirtiest Tricks Used in War. You ever heard that old saying, all is fair in love and war? People are going to do whatever they can to win both of those battles. All right, so we'll get started in just a second. The original video is going to be linked down below. Make sure you support Simple History. They do awesome stuff, great topics. You're definitely going to like more of their stuff. All right, let's get started. All right, I'm also interested to see what they consider to be dirty in war. What do you think? Let me know. All right. Man, look at all these people aiming at us.
The dirtiest tricks pulled in war.
Okay.
A common military maxim states that the best fight is an unfair one. Those on the battlefield will do everything in their power to gain an advantage over their adversaries,
literally,
sometimes stooping to what can only be considered dirty tricks in order to stack the odds in their favor.
Poison the wells.
These are a few of the dirtiest, most underhanded tactics ever pulled in war.
All right, I can already tell. I want you all to, I don't know, make a list, get your comments going. Let's see each of these and say if they're dirty or not. All right, let's see what you got.
Project Eldis Sun, 1967 to 69. The Vietnam War is well known for its dirty fighting, particularly the use of booby traps by the Viet Cong and NVA forces against their more ponderous American and Allied forces.
Can you blame them? Use your geography to your advantage, especially against militarily advanced opponents. You're going to do whatever it takes. You're going to use that geography. That's the oldest trick in the book, if you want to call it a trick.
G pits, tripwires, and other traps were employed in great numbers, becoming a defining characteristic of the conflict. It turns out that the Americans were also willing to use underhanded tactics to even the odds. For years, members of the MACV-SOG had operated in Vietnam, conducting covert operations behind enemy lines. Part of their mission was to sabotage enemy ammunition and supply caches, but these had limited success, as any explosive used to detonate ammo dumps would often scatter the rounds rather than destroy them, and the SOG teams were too small to carry them away.
Resilient.
Pondering this situation, in 1967, Colonel John Singlaub came up with an unconventional solution. The former OSS operative suggested that instead of destroying or capturing the found ammunition, they sabotaged the supplies. He was allegedly inspired by a similar plan carried out by the British during the Waziristan revolt in the 1930s. Designated as Project Eldis Sun, the plan involved the planting of sabotaged rounds into the VC and NVA storage depots.
You know, a sabotaging of ammo and stuff has happened other times before. One of the ones that comes to mind was in World War I. So in World War I, when sometimes you had to leave your trenches in such a way and so quickly that you couldn't move all your materials, right? Your ammunition and stuff. So like booby trapping the ammo or the weapons, right? And that was a tactic.
The majority of the rounds would be 7.62 millimeter for use in the ubiquitous AK-47 in use by the guerrillas. Their powder charge would be replaced by a much more potent explosive that increased the chamber pressure from 45,000 psi to well over 250,000, far too high for an AK to handle, causing catastrophic failure. This was also done with the 12.7 millimeter rounds for use in heavy machine guns, as well as mortar rounds. In all, around 12,000 of these cartridges were made, as well as a reported 2,000 sabotaged mortar shells. When on their infiltration missions, the operators would leave the tainted rounds sometimes in ammo caches and sometimes leaving the rounds on the bodies of guerrillas, hoping they would be recovered.
I wonder how hard they were to mistake, or how easily they blended in with the standard ammunition. Anybody know more about this? You know, like, could you easily tell which ones were different or not, or tampered?
They had to make sure they planted the rounds sparingly with no more than a single round per magazine. Any more and there would be a risk that the faulty ammunition would be discovered, rendering the operation invalid. At the same time, rumors were spread of defects in Chinese-made weapons and ammunition. Documents that were made to resemble official reports made mention of weapon failures due to poor manufacturing processes.
I mean, if it's an actual AK, like a real AK coming out of, you know, Soviet Union or something, I mean, they're still a popular gun today because of a lot of their reliability. I mean, comparatively speaking.
And the Armed Forces radio, which was monitored by North Vietnamese forces, issued bulletins urging Americans not to use captured weapons, as their shoddy quality could lead to catastrophic failures, which only added to the confusion. The main goal of the project was not to necessarily kill or wound, but to undermine the relationship between the Vietnamese and their Chinese and other Eastern Bloc allies.
This probably to the thoughts I was having and was kind of waiting on, which is, was this worth it? Was it worth the infiltration or anything like that? You know, risk versus reward and how much effort you had to put in. But it looks like, you know, I was thinking like, it can't be that useful of a tactic. But now that you look at it politically like this, with the North being supplied by the Chinese, I guess it's a political statement. And that, I guess, makes more sense.
The fake reports and radio broadcasts emphasize the, quote, poor metallurgy, unquote, of communist weapons. In 1969, the operation fell into the hands of the press, who leaked the story, undermining the effectiveness of the project.
Yeah.
It was renamed Project Italian Green and then Project Beanpole, but was eventually abandoned. It is unknown how many rounds ended up in VC and NVA hands or what kind of damage it caused, though there were reports of the confidence of Vietnamese forces being undermined and the relationship between them and their Chinese suppliers strained. Decades later, rumors have surfaced of pro-Assad forces in Syria using the same tactic against rebels, planting the faulty rounds in illegal arms markets. These may have been inspired by U.S. forces repeating Project Eldis Sun in Afghanistan against the Taliban and their supporters.
Well, I was going to bring up another effectiveness thing. If it actually did, no, definitely not. Either in Syria or in Afghanistan, those problems are so big there. But yeah, it definitely seems like something you could get involved, CIA, anything like that, of trying to tamper with the black market, easily get stuff on the black market there, and you could infiltrate it.
Britain's invasion.
Okay. All right. So, trying to think overall context with the Vietnam War. I was mostly just going to mention something I already did before about using terrain and how that was such a formidable foe for the United States, where the United States was advanced in traditional open warfare, like you saw in the world wars and stuff like that, where your technology and your numbers really matters. But fighting in a place like Vietnam, and let's remember, Vietnam has been a place that's had to fight off foreign groups for literally millennia. Right? Go back to China. China repeatedly trying to infiltrate into Vietnam, and at best, maybe making not even tributary states. You go back to old ancient dynasties, and then going into the age of new imperialism, 1900s, right? They're doing with the French, and they defeated the French before they defeated the Americans. So they've had a long history of being able to fight larger powers. There's a larger context. And probably a big lesson there. Anyway, where do you rate that? I don't know. What scale we want to use? Was it like a 1 to 10 scale of the dirty scale? How dirty is that by the Americans doing this?
Invasion of Tibet, 1903. By the turn of the 20th century, Britain had been engaged in what was known as the Great Game with Russia, each side vying for supremacy in Central Asia. Britain.
That was especially focused on Afghanistan, coming in there. Remember the British too, they love that region, especially around Afghanistan and stuff. Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, they want that opium. Y'all remember the Opium Wars? That stuff is going to be big. And then even after the Napoleon Wars, the Opium Wars, still going to have that influence there. But Afghanistan, one of those places like Vietnam that foreign groups just don't have success in. Go back to Alexander the Great, that broke apart, right? And then, of course, fast forward, the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, major part of their collapse in the end was their, ill-gotten war in Afghanistan, which drained them completely and put them very in a negative light, even more negative light in kind of the public world. So Afghanistan, another place you do not invade.
Was firmly in control of India and was seeking to expand its influence. The Viceroy of India, George Nathaniel Curzon, sought to foster a closer relationship with the neighboring nation of Tibet.
By the way, viceroys are economic leaders planted by an imperial nation that was used a lot. The British preferred to use people like that who would then maintain relationships with locals. That's how they conducted a lot of
which was a
their
Chinese protectorate at the time that would provide a buffer zone against foreign encroachment on Britain's most important colony. Instead of finding welcome in the poor nation to the east, however, Curzon heard of rumors of Tibet working with the Russian government. These rumors only confirmed Curzon's greatest fear, that India was vulnerable to a Russian invasion through Tibet. Though military advisors said bringing a sizable army through the Himalayas was nigh on impossible, there was still fear that if the
that would be a dumb thing. That would be a dumb thing. Go through Tibet. If you think Afghanistan's going to be hard.
Sizable army through the Himalayas was nigh on impossible. There was still fear that if the Dalai Lama, the leader of Tibet, forged an alliance with Russia, Britain's foothold in India could be threatened.
They're going to choose whoever can.
Though technically a Chinese protectorate, this hold was very weak, and for all practical purposes, Tibet was treated as an independent country. In 1903,
on the eyes of the Chinese, still like that, has been like that forever.
a military force was assembled and placed under the command of General Francis Younghusband, which consisted of around 3,000 men, including British soldiers, Indian troops, as well as a sizable contingent of Gurkhas and Sikhs under British command. There were also 2 Maxim machine guns and 4 artillery pieces in this force, all of which were state-of-the-art for the era. All that was needed was an excuse to invade. This came when rumors circulated of Tibetan troops crossing the border into Nepal, which was a neutral nation, but a de facto British protectorate. In reality, this incursion was probably a group of shepherds that had become lost, but it was enough to justify a response.
The dirtiest playbook, if there's a bunch of playbooks of dirty things, the thickest one from history has got to be the staging or marketing fake invasions or fake reasons to fight, right? Like, sorry, how many things have been like that, where it's either staged or lied about right away about something happening and then using it as a justification. God, I wish we could. There's a lot.
With this flimsy excuse, Younghusband invaded Tibet with Curzon's support. In December 1903, the expedition set out, before wintering in the mountains near established supply bases. In March 1904, they set out again in earnest and ran into their first major obstacle on March 31st. The Tibetans had blockaded the mountain pass near the village of Guru and refused to allow the British force to pass.
A lot of choke points there.
The 3,000-strong Tibetan force was armed with primitive weapons, including swords, clubs, and matchlock muskets, weapons that were more at home on 17th century battlefields. Events are unclear as to what exactly happened, but some accounts state that the British leadership convinced the Tibetans to douse the lit match cords, which were vital for the operation of the pieces, while the British would also unload their rifles and machine guns as a sign of goodwill during negotiations. When this happened, Younghusband ordered his men to open fire, and were able to do so quickly, as they possessed modern bolt-action rifles, while the Tibetan matchlocks were rendered inoperable. There is some controversy as to whether the Tibetans were disarmed in this manner, but either way, the resulting engagement was little more than a massacre. In what would later be known as the Massacre of Chumikshenko, around 700 Tibetans were killed, while the British force suffered 12 wounded.
Yeah, I mean, when you're faking a sign of goodwill and diplomacy, that's dirty. That is dirty. I mean, it's one thing to be using weapons that people have seen as inhumane or something like that, whatever, to get you an edge, but like faking peace, gotta be up there, right? We'll see. Let's see how this plays out.
The entire incident occurred within 4 minutes. Much of the rest of the conflict went the same way, with Younghusband and his force easily overmatching the woefully outclassed Tibetans. Within 6 months, Tibet was forced to sign a humiliating treaty, paying an indemnity and ceding a portion of land into British control.
These are the kind of events that groups like this will remember a lot more than, you know, say the British or something like that, and be used for anti-imperialist intentions throughout 1900. Well, I'll go back to 17, 18, 1900s. That can exist today for a lot of countries, is these populations are not going to forget that. That distrust is permanent.
Operation Grief.
All right, yep. Where was that on the dirty chart? I think it's pretty high. All right. What do we got? Hitler, of course.
1944.
Of course, he's gonna be here.
By December 1944, Nazi Germany was faltering, with Soviet armies pushing steadily from the east and the Western Allies making significant headway after the successful landings at Normandy. In this desperate situation, Adolf Hitler and German High Command drew up plans for a counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest in Belgium, with the ultimate goal of the vital port and logistics center of Antwerp. In order to stack the odds of the operation further in Germany's favor, Hitler turned to SS Obersturmbannführer Otto Skorzeny to lead an operation behind the Western Allies' lines. Skorzeny was no stranger to these types of missions, having led a daring raid to rescue Italian dictator Benito Mussolini from captivity, and was given his orders by Hitler personally. As early as October 1944, plans were formulated for Operation Grief. One of the objectives for Skorzeny and his men was to seize at least one important bridge over the Meuse River, but the main objective was to sow confusion among American forces. In the weeks leading up to the Ardennes offensive, Skorzeny recruited large numbers of English-speaking German soldiers who would be organized into the 150th Panzer Brigade. Though he received about 2,500 such men, only about 400 could speak passable English, and only about a dozen could speak it fluently. These men were sent to a 6-week training program where they learned as many Americanisms as possible. They watched American newsreels and practiced speaking with American accents, and were taught American slang. All communication was done in English. They also learned other behaviors, such as how to hold a knife and fork the American way, to tap cigarette packs like
the American way. I don't need forks. I don't need forks or anything. Which means you just grip it like a barbarian, an animal, and no manners. And then you hold your cigarettes the right way.
How to hold a knife and fork the American way, to tap cigarette packs like GIs, and other nuances of American behavior. In addition, the force was equipped with uniforms taken from American POWs, and they drove captured American vehicles. Their main objective would be to blend in behind enemy lines and sow as much confusion as possible before the offensive, hopefully making the operation more successful. That was the hope. In reality, many of the men still retained their German accents, causing Skorzeny to lament that, quote, they could certainly never dupe an American, not even a deaf one, end quote. Many of the uniforms still had blood stains from the previous owners or had POW markings on them. Many wore British or Russian clothing, as there were too few American uniforms available. They did manage to acquire some Jeeps and trucks, but only one Sherman tank, with the Germans being forced to use their own vehicles disguised as an American one.
It just has these erase marks that look very similar to an iron cross or something, and then you put some star on top of it. Dude, this is so dumb. This is so dumb.
In spite of these limitations, Operation Grief began. The wider Ardennes offensive caught the Allies off guard, and German forces penetrated deep into enemy lines, allowing some of the commandos to infiltrate American positions. Once there, they committed acts of sabotage, delivered false orders, and changed road signs, which resulted in at least one regiment getting lost.
Something you could do without penetrating the lines there all the time.
Adding to the confusion was a rumor that these commandos would attempt to capture or kill General Eisenhower, which hindered his and other high-level commanders' ability to respond to the unfolding crisis.
Well, that never happened.
The actual numbers of commandos were few and their effect limited, but rumors soon blew their actual effectiveness out of proportion.
I mean, let's be honest. Espionage is a big deal, right? And vetting people and all that. And the chaos of war, I mean, it's a major thing you've got to do.
In this chaotic environment, already bewildered American forces became paranoid that German infiltrators were everywhere. To combat this hidden threat, checkpoints were established, and those stopped there would be asked questions that only Americans would know, such as the state capitals, celebrities, and other pop culture facts.
What's the capital?
One American general, Bruce Clark, was detained for half an hour after he failed to give the appropriate answer about the Chicago Cubs. In spite of this confusion, Operation Grief, as well as the rest of the Ardennes offensive, was a dismal failure. Most of the commandos of the 150th Panzer brigade were withdrawn and attached to a conventional unit. By January, the German forces were thrown back, and the end of the war became an inevitability. Battle of the...
All right, so I don't know, is that super like dirty? That definitely doesn't beat, I think, what the British did in Tibet, like not even close. So I don't know, is that, how dirty are those tactics there? Let me know. All right, next one, Battle of the Marshes. Okay.
The Marshes, 1984. In 1984, the bloody Iran-Iraq war had been raging for 4 years, with both sides suffering tremendous losses.
That's a war that needs to be talked about more in modern history. I know we run out of time often as world history teachers to try to get clear up into the 80s like that for like a world history class where you start in prehistory times. But it explains a lot about the context of Iraq and Iran, which become, of course, prevalent in American history. But people are very void of that. A lot of people don't even know Iraq and Iran had a horribly bloody war just before the Americans get involved in the Gulf War. It also explains Iraq's intentions with Kuwait and that.
Eager to break the stalemate, the Iranian military launched an offensive directed at the Hawaiza Marsh and Majnoon Island, located in southeastern Iraq. Dubbed Operation K-Bar on February 15th, Iranian forces began a concentrated push against Iraqi forces, using speedboats to move rapidly through the flooded terrain. One of their main objectives
by the way, war with Iran and Iraq, where you have like Saddam Hussein, etc., about oil and also water access.
Majnoon Island, a patch of dry land in the swampland. With a bit of prophetic foreshadowing, Majnoon is the Arabic word for crazy or madness. The Iraqis, unable to use their vast quantities of tanks in the marshland, were stretched to the breaking point. Their positions only held due to an extensive defense-in-depth system that held the Iranians in place, as well as the repeated use of chemical weapons. This was not the only tactic at their disposal. Mark Feynman, a journalist covering the conflict, spoke to an Iraqi officer about their plans to hold this important territory. The officer proudly showed him and other members of the press a network of electrical cables that snaked from Iraqi positions to the water in the marshlands and the huge generators that powered them. "You wait until nighttime and you will see how we are killing these Iranian dogs," he said proudly to the journalist. "We are frying them like eggplants." That night, Feynman witnessed one of the Iranian assaults. In response, the Iraqis fired artillery at the approaching boats, forcing the Iranians to leap from their vessels into the chest-deep water. Once they were wading through the marshland, an order was given, and the generators were powered up, sending electricity coursing through the water into the Iranian soldiers. In seconds, hundreds were electrocuted, killed instantly by the high-voltage power surging through their bodies. The next day, the bodies would be gathered and stacked into piles and broadcast on Iraqi state television. There was at least one report that the bodies were also stacked as makeshift roads, piled together to allow tanks and other heavy vehicles passage over the soggy terrain.
This just sounds like Mongol level cruelty.
Though this is difficult to confirm. When the fighting had finished, the Iranian forces had captured the Hawaiza Marshes, though a drive towards Basra was repulsed. Overall, the operation was seen as a Pyrrhic victory for Iran, who suffered major losses during the operation. The Battle of Pisum.
All right, so that was interesting. Dirty? I don't know if there's real like trickery involved. It seems like a utilization of territory, I guess, the same way you would trap or mine. Like, is that different than, again, using something like mines or something like that? I mean, maybe a little bit, but I don't know. Where's that on the dirty scale? That one's not as high for me. I mean, all of the, let's just be honest, all of this sucks. This is all terrible stuff that's going down. Let's not paint that as some cool picture. You know what I mean? This is devastating things.
525 BC.
All right. Okay,
the Battle of Pisum, 525 BC. Even commanders in the ancient world are no stranger to the use of dirty tactics in order to win. In 525 BC, after a series of diplomatic ventures, the Persian Emperor Cambyses II invaded the ancient land of Egypt, where the two armies clashed for supremacy. At this point, Persia was a rising power, ever expanding into territory and influence. In contrast, Egypt's glory days were well behind them and could do little to withstand the invasion. Historians doubt the validity of the following story, but at the Battle of Pisum, it's alleged that Cambyses stacked the odds in his favor even further by the use of a strange form of hostage-taking. The ancient Egyptians believed in the sacred nature of all life, and though they did eat meat, it made up a very small portion of their daily diet.
Their agricultural power, Egyptians, with the Nile there. Persia, this is their superpower state, become a largest empire in that time, in up to that time in world history, and become a major thing. I don't know if you heard me say earlier, but yeah, the Egyptians they absolutely hated being occupied by the Persians. Hated that, which lends a lot of, I guess, credence in a way that people say that when Alexander the Great eventually shows up, that he was welcomed, or at least seen as somebody that would be a lot better to, I guess, potentially be ruled by, or something. Like I see him like as a liberator, a lot more than Persian rule.
They would keep numerous animals as household pets, which were treated with a high degree of reverence. In particular, cats were seen as sacred, being the manifestation of the goddess Bastet. Bastet, or sometimes Bast, was depicted in iconography as a woman with a cat's head, and was the goddess of fertility, childbirth, the home, and protection of the family.
I do need to say, just because it's an important historical point, is, you know, they were saying that these animals would basically be like pets, right? And I'm not just talking cats, but like basically your cattle and stuff. That close proximity is why you're going to see civilizations that did that in ancient times, that lived in that close proximity to livestock, are going to develop immunities to a lot of germs that cause diseases that have been the biggest killers in world history. You know, something like smallpox, for example. And then in contrast, when you look at how devastating disease was in the Americas when Europeans came over, you know, one reason for that is that lack of immunity, because in the Americas, there were not many domesticated animals that lived in proximity to Native American groups, therefore had that susceptibility to the 90% of people that end up dying from those diseases that the Europeans brought over.
And was popular among both men and women. Cats, Bastet's sacred animal, would be treated as part of the family, and their death would lead to mourning among the household and would even be mummified. In the event of a house fire, all efforts would be made to save the animals, even if it means allowing the flames to spread unchecked. So strong was the belief in the sacred nature of animals that, according to the historian Herodotus, to deliberately kill a cat carried a death sentence. In addition, harming a cat could also bring the wrath of Bastet upon the soul of the transgressor. In addition to cats, other animals such as dogs, gazelles, and baboons were also considered sacred and treated with great reverence. Hawks and ibises were so sacred that killing one, even accidentally, would result in execution, regardless of circumstances. Cambyses was well aware of the significance these creatures played in Egyptian culture, and also knew what lengths they would go to in order to avoid blasphemy against their gods. So when the Persian and Egyptian armies met at the Battle of Pisum,
PETA is about to go to just, okay, PETA's about to put, if they're watching this, an official condemnation of the ancient Persian Empire.
Cambyses ordered his men to release large numbers of cats in front of their advancing army. According to the historian Paleoneus, they also drove dogs, sheep, ibises, and other animals that the Egyptians believed to be sacred. As a final measure, Cambyses also had his men paint images of cats on their shields, as he knew that defiling an image of a feline was also blasphemy against us.
Oh my God, all the cat nerds that are watching this right now are now Googling or on Amazon for cat shields, aren't you? Oh gosh, oh no.
In the face of this unusual tactic, the Egyptians were unwilling to risk offending the deity and were soon routed from the battlefield. The survivors, including the pharaoh Semetic III, fled to Memphis, where they were soon besieged. Eventually, they would be defeated, and though Semetic would be captured and treated well by Cambyses, he would be executed after attempting a rebellion.
God, I wish I had this story like a week or 2 weeks ago. We just did our lesson on Alexander the Great's like takeover of Persia, and in that we were talking about how Persia, was occupied, or Egypt was occupied by the Persians. This would have been a great story to just, I don't know, add something interesting about the context there with ancient Egypt and then the Persian takeover. I need a time machine to watch this. All right. Next year's students, we'll get you covered.
Giving the ever-expanding Persian Empire control over the rich and ancient land of Egypt. Whether on ancient battlefields or in modern conflicts, soldiers are willing to do whatever they can to gain an advantage over their opponents.
All right. Hey, looks like at the conclusion, but don't forget, where's that on the dirty scale? Where is that? Is that dirty? Is it like, I guess in a way they're using their own culture against them. But like, it's not like they force them to like have to kill cats, like using the cats as like meat shields or something. So I don't know if that was the case. I think that would be kind of dirty. Like if they're like, oh gosh, strapping up cats to shields and stuff like that and using that as like a deterrent. I think that would put it up in the dirty meter up there. But this one, I don't know.
And even if these tactics may seem dishonorable, pragmatism often wins out.
It does.
And soldiers will do whatever necessary to achieve victory.
Literally life and death, right?
Hey, it's Chris Kane. You're probably used to hearing me during one of our advertising spots, but today I want to talk about something a little bit different.
It's so interesting seeing the voices. It's interesting when you look at like DJs or like singers and stuff like that, because that voice is not a voice. His voice is not one you would hear in normal discussions, and you always wonder, like, do they put on that voice? Anyway,
every video that we create is more than just content. It's a blend of research, of creativity, of passion for history.
They're great, man.
We do it because we believe in the power of history, because its lessons, its stories, and its ability to connect everybody is what we're all about.
Or divide.
Sometimes the reality of operating a YouTube channel presents challenges in the form of demonetization occasionally, which impacts the ability to produce content that we're passionate about.
This is getting talked about a lot right now, with a lot of stuff's getting flagged right now. And obviously if they're using content, if their content's getting flagged when I react to stuff, same thing happens. And yeah, it's too bad that way.
Now we're
especially if appeals get rejected. Oftentimes YouTube does a pretty good job of taking down those limited ads or demonetizations, because it's all algorithmic. Like they see the transcripts and the imagery and videos, and then just through software flag stuff, right? And then what you do is you can appeal it, and then a human, at least it says, a manual review of it. And more times I found out than not, they do repeal that and then allow it to have a full audience. They won't throttle the video and stuff like that. But sometimes it doesn't, and it's kind of hard for them, because they have to appease their advertisers, because their advertisers often don't. They usually don't want to get on something that could make their brand look bad, but at the same time, YouTube wants creators obviously to make popular content. So it's kind of a balancing act, it seems like, for YouTube and the logistics of it all.
You are amazing audience to ask for your support in keeping the channel, our shared passion, alive and thriving. We're inviting you to join us on Patreon and contribute to the ongoing creation of our content. By joining us on Patreon, you're doing more than just supporting our content. You're becoming an integral part of the community, and we're dedicated to preserving and promoting history. Remember, every bit of support makes a real difference. If you'd like to learn more about how you can help, please visit the link in the description below. Thank you, as always, for your interest and your hunger for history.
I'll comment some more on that if you want to hear my perspective. So before the final comments that I have on the video, but yeah, like what he's talking about, probably have seen a lot of content creators really talk about this a lot recently because there's talks of, I think, policy changes and stuff. And YouTube has also bounced back and tried to clarify some things and try to ease the minds of people. But it's hard in the history community because we do deal with age appropriate, I guess, concepts and topics. And there are content creators, say, you know, like Simple History, that do a good job with it, right? Like do a good job handling that. But then there's people that are irresponsible, of course, with that, and can use history and can make history very come off in a very irresponsible manner that would in fact be something that advertisers are not going to want to be a part of, right? So it's hard because I feel like it's hard for YouTube to figure that out, right? To know. And it would also be hard for them to be like, well, okay, we'll make, I don't know, some list of like trusted content creators. And they kind of do that. They kind of will look at your streak. If you're continually putting stuff that's getting, I'm sure, manually rejected because of the irresponsibility of handling the serious subject matter, then your videos are not going to be monetized. They're not going to give you the benefit of the doubt, but what they're trying to do is give the benefit of the doubt to people that have been honest about that. But still, when you're talking about people that do this for a living, right, it becomes difficult. If it's not clear and consistent, then yeah. So the biggest help that you can see what's happening, the biggest way you can help a lot of these creators is to join those third-party financial incentives that they have, like Patreon. And I've seen, you know, there's, you know, for years been people trying to, from the history community, from when I first started, of trying to make alternative places, you know, to have creators come into, but it's kind of hard. But anyway, I should encourage you all to be supporting these people, support all these content creators that are doing this. Some of the commentator communities like me and Vlogging Through History, I know he's trying to pump up his Patreon as well, which is great, and try to give more benefits to being somebody. So it's not just like, hey, I'm just, you know, giving you this money because I'm supporting you, but actually I get something in return. It's something I gotta, I guess, think about too. Simplest thing I know for me, and I've put polls, you know, about ways to support, but would be, you know, for my end, maybe giving earlier access to videos, maybe a day before or something like that. Something I guess I got to look into, but I've always had a hard time pushing things to ask for money, especially if it is at the behest or in replacement for supporting these original content creators, right? Like obviously your support should go to them first, and then for, I guess, the commentary community like myself or VTH or something like that, make sure that's taken care of first before you start doing that. But I mean, with that, there's still things like that. I do have the Patreon. I don't have at the moment any specific like bonuses to that. I mean, you can get some like merch if you're, you know, pledging for long enough, or some Discord access and stuff. But it's something I guess I should look into. But I've also wanted to make sure that people will actually support it. One way is channel memberships. Channel memberships have been on for a long time. One thing I actually do with that is you actually get access to a ton more videos of mine that are ones that haven't been my like normal commentary videos, but like live streams and some of the like trivia shows and some of that stuff. I put that into members only. It helps with the algorithm as well, but you can actually get a lot more access if you want to support that way. But anyway, support these folks first, right? Support these content creators first. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see what kind of happens policy wise with history related content on YouTube going forward. It's always kind of moving in different directions. Depends on who's in charge, CEOs, how the advertisers are dealing with YouTube. There's so many moving pieces. But anyway, okay, you stayed with me this long. Awesome. The video, back to the video. Yeah, let's see what you guys thought about dirty tactics in war, and which ones were you think were truly dirty or maybe not so much. I think I gave my thoughts along the way. All right. Anyway, this was super fascinating. Some stuff I want to interject into some of my lessons going forward. And with that, we'll see y'all later.